Today, my mom slipped on ice and broke her ankle. The person whose house she fell in front of came out and yelled at us when I came to help, saying I wasn't her son and how dare I use his driveway. Reddit, what moments have you had where you just thought, what the frick is wrong with you? I was in the car with my grandma on a large 4-lane road in town. A car next to us sideswiped us. Pretty hard actually, so we pulled over to do the whole information exchange thing. The woman in the other car leaps out and starts screaming at my grandma saying, "You are the rudest person I've ever seen. You wouldn't let me over." I had my blinker on. I was completely taken aback. My grandma is the sweetest old lady, and had either of us actually seen her blinker I know Gram would let her over. But there was heavy traffic and her car was directly beside us. I dealt with the beast in the Camry and got her insurance. She ended by saying, "This isn't my fault, that woman should let people over." I laughed, which took her aback. I said, "You're 100% at fault here. And by the way, a blinker is not a yield sign even if we had seen it. Learn how to drive before you hurt or kill someone." Then we left. I was pretty happy when Gram told me her insurance had accepted liability and the agent told her something to the effect of, "Yes, she yells at us too." You're dealing with the typical driver who never uses her blinkers unless she feels she cannot get away without it, like in your case with heavy traffic. In such a scenario, this kind of driver now feels that since she has been so nice as to use her blinker, anyone who does not respect her needs is rude. Where I live, at least half the drivers here are like that. It boggles the mind. Back when I was 13 or so, my cousin and I were at a small town Mardi Gras parade. We found a convenient spot and stood there, waiting for the parade to start. About 30 seconds later, a man tapped my cousin on the shoulder and started cussing her and me out big time for being in his way. Fricking kids, no fricking respect these days. Raised by TV and single moms, etc. I turned around and saw an empty folding chair about 30 feet from the roadway, presumably his. Yes. People do set out folding chairs to watch parades, but they usually set them up about 5 feet away from the road, not 30. Yes, we were standing in his way, but that's like yelling at someone for skipping you in the grocery line when you're standing in the produce section. Be there or don't. And a simple "I was here to watch the parade and you're standing in front of me. Could you please find somewhere else" would have worked. He didn't have to automatically go to fricking kids with no respect. Out of spite, he got to stare at the backs of our heads for the next half hour instead of the parade. We caught lots of beads. I used to work in a record store, and during one of our busy moments of the day, a co-worker started to have a seizure up by the cash registers. I immediately stopped ringing up a customer to go help my co-worker and try to figure out what to do. About 2 minutes into me helping my co-worker, whom everyone could see was needing help, a customer asks if we could hurry up and check them out. I remarked that I'm sorry that I was busy helping someone that was having a seizure and they'd have to wait a couple minutes. Of course the customer gives me an angry, frustrated look and starts back talking. After I get the situation taken care of, I go to check the customer out and all they were trying to buy was a CD for 25 cents. Upon the customer leaving, they remarked that they would never come back because of the slow service. Whoa, just wow. When I was 21, I got my first big kid job, so I decided to buy myself a new, used car since my clunker was awful. I got a beautiful Pontiac G6. I loved it. Exactly 3 weeks after I bought it, I had to go back to the dealership to sign some paperwork so I could lower my car payment. My mom came with me. I was driving back home, going about 35 miles per hour, minding my own business, and this old man in a Chevy Avalanche, about 80 years old, pulled out of a parking lot right in front of me. Had he floored it, I would have barely missed him if I slammed on my brakes. However, he stopped to make sure nobody was coming from the other direction. I slam on my brakes, blare my horn, then T-bone his truck. The front end of my car was barely there, fluids leaking all over, airbags all in my face. My mom and I both got hurt, and this jackass decides to get out of his truck and start screaming at me, asking me why I hit his car, what is wrong with me, etc. I looked like I was all of 16 at the time, so I'm sure he thought he was right in his old brain of his. He kept physically coming toward me, swearing at me, screaming, even when the cop came. Finally, after 10 minutes of screaming, he asked if we were okay, to which my mother went off on him. that we weren't okay, and he had no right being on the road. Come to find out he hadn't had a valid license for a few years. Seriously though, how did he think that I hit him on purpose? My gran fell on the curb in front of my house when she was getting out of her car and broke her hip. She was lying on the ground crying when she said a stranger passed. My gran asked her to just knock on our front door and the person just stared at her and kept walking, and my gran waited an hour until my dad came out and found her. What kind of person just stares at a little 80-year woman crying on the ground? Frick that person. I once parked my car on the street, completely legally, when visiting a friend. Some guy comes running out of the house yelling at me saying that was his parking spot. He had a large driveway that could easily park 6 cars, but here he is, yelling at me for parking on the street I was completely and totally morally and legally entitled to park on. I pointed to the street sign saying it was okay to park, and he yelled, "I don't care what the fricking sign says, you butthole. Move your freaking car or you will regret it." I ignored his threat and went to visit my friend. It was a late night, and I came out about 3 AM to drive home, only to discover that someone, wonder who, had let the air out of all my tires. Luckily for me I own an air compressor, so I hooked it up to my car's cigarette lighter and pumped the air back into my tires. It was pretty cold out, and not the greatest compressor in the world, so it was a miserable 20 minutes or so. Once I was done, I returned the favor, letting the air out of all the tires in the 4 cars in his driveway as well as his boat trailer. I also superglued his mailbox closed. That made me feel better. Should have glued the valves on his tires. I worked at a small food stand-like place once in Disney World. We closed at 3 every day after lunch, and were right next to another food place that remained open. Well, this day, a man came up to our window at around 3:30. We had already closed everything and demanded food. I told him nicely that all of our kitchen had been closed, but there's a similar restaurant, literally like 15 yards away, that served the same items. Well, he freaked out, started screaming and complaining about the service in front of his children and a bunch of other kids. He even called one of my co-workers a moron. I know he was fully aware of Disney's policies to never let anyone go unsatisfied. Maybe he'd get free crap, right? Well, he did. Food and drinks. As he was given this food that came from the neighboring kitchen, I remember I gave him the most "what the frick is wrong with you" look I had ever given, even in risk of losing my job for not looking Disney happy when around a guest. The part that peed me off most is that he acted like that in front of his children and was rewarded. He didn't even say thank you. I was managing a restaurant on a busy weekend when the tornado sirens went off and the radio told everyone to take cover immediately. My hosts ran to take cover and call their kids at home. Some douchebag customer decides to start yelling at me to seat him immediately, that this was ridiculous. He didn't need to take cover. A tornado did hit, about a mile away. I'm sorry, but I am terrified of tornadoes. Those are actually one of my top 3 fears. If I had been in your place, I would have probably screamed at him to take freaking cover, or else I'll knock him unconscious and make him take cover, because brain hurts. I was on the bus to a shopping mall and it was very crowded. Upon arriving, people massed for the doors, and when following behind the torrent of people, in my own pace, I suddenly see an old, 70-80 years woman silently frantic, standing in the middle of the massing crowd trying to get the attention of someone, with tears streaming down her face. Everyone in the entire bus just went by her, some pushing, others commenting, but all ignoring. I ask her what's wrong and she points to the front of the bus where I see a pair of legs sticking out below the bus, in front of the front wheel. I can't pull him out. It's my husband, she cries. Apparently, her very old husband was hit in the head by the mirror of the bus as the couple was waiting to get in, and he was unconscious and bleeding. The bus driver hadn't even noticed anything, so while I checked up on the husband, the bus driver closed the doors and initiated to pull out into traffic. I had to slam the glass really hard to get his attention, and if it wasn't for traffic blocking the road he would have pulled out regardless, thinking I was just a disgruntled, late would-be passenger. What sickens me about this experience is that some people are so busy with their own little lives that they are willing to ignore the tears of a crying old helpless lady, practically brushing up against them, because it might mean that her obvious discomfort might require excessive burdening aid from them that just doesn't fit the planned schedule. What the frick is wrong with some People, update due to interest. The man was a fake alright after I had pulled him out as gently as I could and provided basic care. I do not know the term in English, but I put him into a position learned from first aid courses. He had taken a huge gash in the head, but when the paramedics arrived they just said that I did the right thing, and we'll take care of him now. The paramedics' calmness was either incredibly professional and disconnected or just experienced, but I felt at ease afterwards. Never heard from them. This is the only one that really made me sick to my stomach. For a while I worked at a gas station, and most of the time I had to sit in a small building and just watch what went on outside. I was doing a bit of paperwork one day when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. One customer was waving frantically to me, the pump hose in one hand, with no nozzle, and gas spraying everywhere. I slammed the emergency stop button, and alarms started going off everywhere. I ran outside with the absorption powder to try to get this massive spill under control, and at the same time, I was trying to explain to the people that were coming up to me why the pumps weren't working. At this point I was a bit unconcerned with customer service. My number one priority was to get this dangerous spill under control. The guy who broke the nozzle felt it was a good time to come up to me and tell me I need a refund for all that gas. You know, I understood that because the gasoline was shooting out onto the ground instead of his tank, he would eventually need his money back. But while the gasoline is still on the ground, and I'm desperately trying to clean it up so that nobody gets hurt, that is not the right time to demand a refund. Fortunately my manager came out. He had to call the fire department and tell them not to come, and he dealt with this guy and all the people that felt the need to tell me that they were in a hurry and when would the pumps come back on. My friend got hit by a car at an intersection. The girl was speeding. After my friend literally flies over the car and lands on the pavement, the driver pulls over and starts to yell at my friend who got hit. She doesn't even take out her phone to call 911 or anything. She just goes on about how this is the second accident this month. Why weren't you looking? Do you know how much this will cost me? I was thinking, WTF lady, you just hit my friend with your car. Shut the frick up. You'd think it would flip a switch in her head, since it was the second accident that month. Was on vacation in Winnipeg. Go for a Slurpee at the strip mall. Notice a car in the parking lot that just pulled up is leaking fluid. Fluid catches fire. Go into a store to get a fire extinguisher. Nope, don't have one. Next store, a restaurant with a specific oil fire extinguisher. Nope, what if we need it? Even though they have two. Into the grocery store. Nope, not our problem. What could have been a very simple fix, or at least attempt, turned into the car becoming a giant melted slag heap. Cars around it damaged, light pole destroyed, storefront damaged, asphalt melted, etc. Pretty similar story. I was about 11, riding my bike that had, unknown to me, some pretty serious mechanical faults with the handlebars. I'm going towards a little bump in the curb, crossing the street, so I pull up a little, and suddenly the whole array comes off the frame, so I land in this tangle with my bike, half on the road. I'm pretty badly knocked and scratched up, and hey, I was 11, so I'm not exactly together, screaming and crying for my mother, etc. Some woman, all business suited, the only person in the vicinity, comes strutting by in these big tall heels, stops, leans over me, and goes shh, and walks off. I mean, who the frick does that? On my wife's 30th birthday, my mother sent her a happy birthday card in the morning. About an hour later my wife finds out her grandmother had passed away. She, of course, wasn't in the best of moods after that, so decided just to be alone for a couple of hours. Meanwhile, my mother composed an email to my wife several pages long going on about how rude my wife was for not thanking her for the e-card and how she's always been ungrateful and uncaring towards her. My wife called her and calmly informed my mom of why she hadn't replied to her e-card the very instant she got it, and my mom decides to get angry at me for not calling her right away to tell her not to get angry at my wife. When my mom confronted me about it, I only said, if you don't want to put your foot in your mouth, don't open it. You're a good husband. : One of my dogs, Golden Lab, was outside running with me and my brother when we heard a lot of barking. We turn around and a Doberman and another large dog, looked kinda like a Rhodesian Ridgeback, were chasing us. I'd met the owners a few times and knew that they had an invisible fence, but I guess it was off. Basically, the dogs mauled my dog and bit my forearm, but I held them off from my brother and he ran home with my dog. I went to their house a couple hours later, after washing out my dog's cuts, and confronted them about it. I asked them basically just to ensure that the fence was working, pay the vet bill, and asked if the dogs weren't diseased. The guy's response was, "Your dog should grow a pair. My dogs aren't even that big," and slammed the door in my face. My family raised heck and the guy ended up paying a nice sum of money. My dog is fine but has some issues with one of her front legs sometimes. I was standing at a crosswalk of a fairly busy street one day, next to a woman gabbing on a cell phone, and her little 3-4-year-old son toddling around. The woman wasn't making any attempt to look at the kid, and wasn't holding his hand. The kid, probably bored by waiting, toddled right past me, jumped off the curb, and started walking into the street. As soon as I saw him leaping off the curb, I instinctively shouted "Oh no," sprang into action, and ran for him. I managed to grab him by the back of the shirt and yank him back to the curb before the SUV whizzed by at 40-50 mph. Obviously, they weren't paying attention either. The boy starts sobbing, of course, because what little kid wouldn't? It was scary. I spun around, and immediately, I met with his mom's face as she proceeds to flip out, screaming about how dare I touch her son and how dare I make him cry. I tried to argue and tell her that I just saved the kid's life when he walked out into the road, but even after hearing that, she just kept calling me nasty names and screaming at me. She may not have noticed me wresting her toddler from a fate of being vaporized into a fine killy paste, but, given the circumstances, shouldn't she have at least given me the benefit of considering that I was telling the truth? She wouldn't stop screaming incoherent garbage at me, while still holding her phone near her face. Mind you, heaven forbid she'd end the call, so eventually, I just shouted back that she should keep a better eye on her son and walk to another crosswalk 2 blocks down. I wasn't expecting a grand hero's parade, but a simple thanks for not letting my boy become Kinder Jelly would have been nice. Coincidentally, this was near where I lived, and I ended up seeing she and her boy again about 6 mo later, as they were walking through the neighborhood. She was still on her cell, but this time, the boy was trailing after on a leash. Lesson learned, I guess : TLDR. I saved a kid from being hit by an SUV. His mom gets angry at me. Of course she was mad. You just pointed out in an undeniable way how supremely incompetent she is as a parent. I head out for what I hope will be peaceful walk with my dog, a lab mix. At the end of the day, she's on a leash in the middle of the street. A full-grown German Shepherd comes tearing out a yard without warning and grabs my dog by the neck, starting to shake her as dogs do in a dog fight. My dog is not a fighter and just takes it. I begin kicking the German Shepherd to get it to let go, but it's not having much effect. My dog starts to whimper and I see later it's because the dog has bitten through her ear and it's torn. I increase the strength of my kicks and succeed in kicking the German Shepherd away from my dog, who then runs back in its yard. The owner comes up to me and yells at me angrily for kicking her dog. No apology. I was only wearing sneakers and her dog is unharmed. I say, "You have to be killing me." She turns away, calling me an asshole, and begins screaming at the top of her lungs at her daughter. My wife tells me this dog may have bitten another walker. Cops get involved. Unbelievable. A few years back, I was working for Garchucks before they closed. I worked in the backside of the store, in the children's section and intimate apparel. Once I was next to my register, organizing panties or something, when a woman walks up and asks me to ring her up. I walk over and begin scanning her items when her son wanders off towards the expensive leather jackets in the women's section on the other side of my register. The woman is paying absolutely zero attention to her son, even has her back to him. As I am still ringing up her massive amount of items, her son climbs up into the middle of the coat rack. He grabs onto the metal bars on top and begins swinging back and forth, screaming "Ama chimpanzee, ama chimp." Of course, the rack tumbles over on its side, causing a freaking chain reaction that sends all of the coat racks crashing to the ground. I run over, pull her son out of the middle of the collapsed rack, make sure he's okay, and attempt to get the $500 each coats off the ground. The lady, Still at the register, she didn't even bother checking to see if her kid was okay. Suddenly shouts excuse the frick out to me. You wanna finish ringing up my fricking items? Flabbergasted, I stare at her in shock. The carnage of her son's exploits all over the ground behind me. And then I rang that B up. FML. Many years ago, I was the cable guy in New Jersey. One day, we had a severe hurricane and there was massive flooding everywhere. I was asked by dispatch to come in and help handle downed poles and other emergencies. People will live without power, but not cable TV, believe me. So I hop in my old 74 Mustang and drive off to HQ. On the way, the road flooding was horrific. I nearly gave up after several fruitless routes. Eventually, I reached an impasse. I had to navigate this one road that was flooded really bad. A BMW was floating by. I looked at the arrangement of cars and decided if I stayed left of car X and right of car Y, I should be able to snake through the lake of water. I was wrong. My car lifted and began to float. Water poured in from all directions. The dashboard lights all lit up. Abandon ship. So I did. I opened the door, flooding the car, and escaped. I swam in the mucky water and came out on someone's lawn. As I pulled myself up out of the muck, I was head to toe in mud. Just then, a door opened and a very fat and unpleasant woman screamed at me, "Look what you did to my lawn." I looked at her lawn. It was a flooded mess, most of it underwater and much of it carried away down the street. Oh, and it had a few divots where my hands and feet were when I pulled myself out of the muck. I couldn't believe she was upset at a few divots when 30% of her lawn was floating out to sea, but she continued to berate me. I was freezing cold, covered in mud, upset at ruining my car and in shock that this old bat was actually chastising me. I watched my car lister port, then sink. Only the roof stood above the waves. It was a total loss. No point in thinking about it. As this horrible woman continued screaming at me and threatening to call the cops, I swam to the far side of the mini lake to find drier land. As I did, some black dude in a Cadillac pulled up and offered me a ride. I explained I was covered in mud. He didn't care. He saw the whole thing and just wanted to help out a fellow traveler in trouble. He drove me almost all the way to HQ. I thanked him profusely. I'll never forget that guy. Once at work, I was one of only 5 who made it. We spent the next 14 hours fixing downed wires and flooded boxes for $7.24 an hour, plus time and a half. Shoulder pooped in her yard and mixed it in with the muck. But alas, hindsight is 20/20. I was out walking my dog, because at the time she was cooped up a lot and I wanted to let her stretch her legs. We walked from our apartment complex to the neighborhood next door. My dog had already done her business and I, a responsible member of society, picked it up and threw it away. While walking past a house, a woman runs out and starts yelling about getting her gun. I thought for sure I had misunderstood her, so I said, "What?" This causes her to run back inside and bring a large man out with her. "What did you say to my wife?" he yelled. I told him, calmly, that she came out and yelled at me and I was trying to figure out why she was angry. She begins to scream about how my dog, this is the first time I'd ever walked in this neighborhood, was crapping in her yard and she was going to shoot me if she caught it happening. I assured her that I had never been by her house and I was the only one walking the dog. I pointed out that we weren't even slowing down near the house until she came out and threatened to shoot me. But reasoning with morons doesn't exactly work. So instead she kept screaming and her giant husband seemed to be getting more agitated. So I just started walking again and avoided their house on the way back out of the neighborhood. That said, it did inspire a hobby. If my dog dropped a lot of poop, I'd pick it up like normal, put it in a plastic sack, and drive over to their house. If the lights were out and the cars were gone, I'd take the bag and empty it on the lawn, right where they'd likely step out of their car when they returned. I never saw it happen, but I always hoped it played out like I planned. I can see this being an excusable poop dumping. Now someone else took to throwing bag turds into the bed of my truck. I did not offend anyone with the dog. Someone thought my truck was better than a garbage can. One summer I was a camp counselor and I was in one of those 15-passenger vans packed with kids. We were coming back from a trip in North Carolina and we were on a curvy mountain road. A woman in an oversized SUV was coming up the other side of the road and we slowed a little to make sure she could pass. She was obviously angry that we were there and that she couldn't fit. At that moment a small portion of the road gave out under one of our tires and our van fell off the side of the hill and rolled twice. We weren't going fast and no one was very injured, which was good, but everyone was shaken and a little cut up. What topped it off was that the woman in the SUV came back. We thought to help us, but she rolled down the window and screamed at us to watch our driving and then drove off. To this day it baffles me that someone could do something like this. I was a school teacher and we had a group of students that would tour around doing dance performances. Our kids performed in a library and one of the kids hurt themselves during the performance. It was closing time for the library and I am walking with this girl, my arm around her holding her up, trying to get her back to the bus, and she is just bawling. She was ginger so it was obvious she was crying. Anyone could see. The janitor starts yelling at us to get moving. He needed to clean. I tell him she is injured and is moving really slow, but we were trying to get her out. He keeps snapping at us, making her cry more. I finally get her out to the van and get her squared away. I then go back in and tell the janitor that it was rude of him to yell at a teenage girl like that. He just doubled down and said, "You got problems." I got problems. What a dong. Every year there's a Greek festival here in our VA, and all the people in the neighborhoods around there gets a little pissy about it because of all the people parking. But some people take it farther and actually put out obstructions, like chairs with orange tape between them, or cones, to block people from parking in front of their house. The problem with this is that it's public parking, so they're really just being crybabies. Which is why I like to find some house close to the festival that's done this. I get out of my car, throw the cones into the person's yard and park right there. Frick 'em. I'm only going to be at the festival for as long as it takes to get food because it's usually hot as frick. One time some guy came out screaming at me about how I was breaking the law and he was going to call the cops and have me arrested and my car towed. I just looked at him and said, "No, you won't, because I haven't broken any laws." So I got my food all boxed up and I'm walking back to my ride enjoying the heck out of one of the 5 gyros I bought. One for now, one for later, one for later, one for my ex-wife, The dickhead is just gaping at us. So the cop says, "Sir, if you don't take care of this trash by the time I'm done moving my cruiser, I'll have to cite you for littering. And don't block off the street again," and goes to move his cruiser. By the time I'm done loading up and pulling out, with a wave to officer cool as frick, the dickhead is dutifully picking up his cones and orange tape with a stunned expression on his face like reality just came crashing down. TLDR. Dickhead tried to block off a parking spot. I took it anyway. He called cops. Cop was cool as frick. Told him to pick up the cones or be cited for littering. I left enjoying my victory gyro and loving life. The sweet lamby taste of victory. A car touched, luckily driving slow, my mother's wheelchair, throwing her frail body to the ground. Driver exits, ignores mother, looks at car. "You are lucky that there are no scratches in the paint. Thanks go out to H for preventing a murder that day." My dad's friend bought an old hunting cabin in Colorado and we helped renovate it into something livable. When we started out was just one room with planks for walls, no insulation, and split pine trees for siding. Now it has a kitchen and bathroom and electricity and plumbing and insulation and looks brand new. What did the neighbor have to say about us fixing up that old eyesore? "My house smells like sawdust." Maybe it was a compliment. Sawdust is a great smell. My roommate's grandmother is 100 years old and like 80 pounds with cats in her pockets. She has to sleep on an air mattress instead of a regular mattress or she'll end up with insane bed sores really quickly because she is so frail. She lives in a nursing home and has a CNA that is supposed to check on her. The CNA noticed that her mattress was entirely deflated and failed to report it. A day later, when someone else came to check on her, the problem got fixed. When confronted, the initial CNA said, "Oh, I forgot. My roommate's grandmother is now in the hospital because of this." The CNA was promptly fired. Upvote for the description of her weight. I was in Walmart with my girlfriend a few months ago. We were looking at silverware in the kitchen section, and we parked our cart in one of the larger aisles since no one was around. We're both in our early 20s. As we looked through the various utensils, a tall skinny blonde man who looks about 40 comes and stands near our cart. I glance over at him for a split second, and he seems to be looking at the items on the shelf next to the cart. Then I look back to my girlfriend, and the man yells at us, "Did you seriously just look at me and not understand why I was standing here?" We both look up, and the man is glaring at us angrily. Neither of us know what the heck he is talking about, and kind of just stare back, dumbstruck. "Move your cart." Girlfriend grabs the cart and stammers a quick, "Oh, okay, sorry." Guy glares at us and waltzes around the corner. Before he is out of earshot, girlfriend says, "Geez, sorry," rather quietly in my direction. The man whirls around and snaps, "What did you say to Emmy? Filthamouth. Geez, sorry." Angry man leaves in a huff. Girlfriend reduced to tears. Before anyone questions my manliness for not ripping his arms off, I am a rather small female and I was shocked into silence by the crazy bastard. I still feel bad for not grabbing one of the nearby forks and forcefully placing it into his brain. TLDR. Man yelled at and made my girlfriend cry in Walmart because we couldn't read his mind. People on drugs are scary. It's probably better that you didn't engage him. If saying sorry made him flip, imagine what showing anger would do. I was at a store downtown which is very close to an international school. There was a young Asian girl in front of me in line trying to pay for her items but wasn't really understanding how to use the debit machine. She obviously didn't speak much English, but the teller, getting extremely irritated, just kept barking at her in English on what to do. She kept trying to swipe her card the wrong way. I couldn't help but speak up for the poor girl. Seriously, how freaking hard is it to just nicely show her how to swipe her card the correct way? My roommate and I were running errands at Target. Oftentimes people will stand outside the entrance asking for donations and such, and one girl was there that day for an organization. I forgot. As we were about to go in, this mother and her son walk out and the girl politely asks if they have any spare change. All of a sudden they both explode on this poor girl, yelling at her to stop trying to sell them things, calling her a CSW, telling her to go the frick home, etc. It was so strange to see. Of course, she wasn't going to take any of their crap, so she calmly but firmly responded saying she wasn't trying to sell them anything, not to call her such names, and that she was staying right there. The son kept calling her a S, so she finally said, "I can't believe you kiss your mother with that mouth." The way he rushed at her, I swear I thought he was going to attack her, but he just got super close to her face and yelled, "Ugly S," and knocked her paper's clipboard out of her hand. Finally security came out and they ran for it, the girl calling after them, "I think I'm actually very pretty. Thank you very much," while we helped her pick up her things. I still couldn't fathom that two people would randomly do that. Man. I was working in a hardware store when a man came in and asked where the thermostats were. I walked him over, showed him the 3 units we carried, and then asked if it was for his home or an apartment. He asked why that was important and I explained that if he was renting, and depending on the apartment type, altering an apartment's heating system might be against the rental agreement. It's against mine without express permission, and that he should just check in with his landlord before starting. At this point the conversation stalled. The man got this strange, angry look on his face and he leaned in and growled into my ear, "I am the freaking landlord and I hope they all freaking burn." He then stormed out of the store without another word. Sounds like he was afraid you were going to sue. When I was a kid, I whacked my elbow on a door handle. May have ruptured a bursa. Man, it hurt. I was maybe 9, and I was screaming in pain, tears running down my face, sobbing. The whole Steven Spielberg. One of my parents' lifelong friends grabbed, physically restrained everybody who tried to comfort me, saying, "Oh, he's hit his funny bone. he'll be laughing in a minute. It felt like forever, but I guess it was 5, maybe 10 minutes. I'm curled up in the fetal position, holding the elbow and screaming, and I still remember seeing her grab people's arms to pull them back when they reached towards me. 1. On that door handle, there was no way I could have hit my funny bone without warping the space-time continuum. 2. Who the heck has ever laughed from a shot on that exposed nerve? Anyone? 3. How long can an allegedly normal human being listen to a child scream and not only decline to help, but actively stop others from helping? And, no, the laughing part never happened. In related news, when I met her 10 years later, she was just as prolific a sower of sorrow as I had remembered. That woman never saw me sober as an adult. Every time she showed up, I checked out of reality until she was gone. Okay, so I live in a fairly wealthy town where everyone's really self-absorbed and materialistic. I had a tree in my backyard that had been there for quite some time that began to lean over the fence over the neighbor's property. Now, it wasn't covering a window or casting a shade on any part of the house that might anger someone in any way whatsoever. It was barely over their fence with its branches sagging down, but nowhere near touching the ground. So the neighbor apparently was angered by our tree ruining their perfect view of my garage and decided to pay a tree cutting company to cross the fence, enter our property, and cut down the entire tree. Not to mention it was a beautiful oak tree, and that they could have just cut the branches that were over their property. In the end, the company reimbursed us for $500 or so, but I would have rather had that tree standing there. I just can't imagine what was going through their head when they decided that they could decide to remodel my yard to their liking. Just throw salt over the fence occasionally. A few years ago, I was riding my road bike with some other cyclists, teammates, on a rural road in MA. I was drafting, tired and not paying attention, and ended up touching the rear wheel of the cyclist in front of me with my front wheel. As any cyclist knows, this is bad, equivalent to crossing the beams. We were doing about 20 miles per hour. I ended up going over the handlebar like a dolphin jumping a wave. Well, if the crest of the wave was a handlebar and the trough was asphalt, thankfully, I flew off the road into the grass. Good, no road rash, but I landed solidly on my shoulder and ended up getting a stage II shoulder separation. As I'm on the ground, writhing in pain, with my bike lying against a fence, it bounced end on end and came to rest artfully on a fence, and a group of concerned cyclists surrounding me. A driver stops to honk at us and curse us out for riding on the road. Get off the road, you don't pay taxes, blah blah blah. My dad was going about his usual routine of walking the dog in the alley. He always lets the dog off the leash to run around for a bit while they walk, and when he's ready to go back he puts the leash back on. One day, he bent down to put the leash on his dog and apparently something caught the dog's eye, so he took off. This resulted in the dog running to the end of the alley and into the road, eventually being hit by a car. The dog died on impact and lay in the middle of the road. As my dad tried to get traffic to stop, or slow, or change lanes so he could go collect his dead dog, he was met with a chorus of horn blows and obscenities screamed from car windows. One guy even went as far as pulling up next to him and slowing down specifically so he could flip him off. I can't imagine my day being burdened so by having to slow down and lose 30 seconds out of my day so a guy could collect his dead dog out of the road. The horror those drivers must have felt. That's really sad, but then again, this is one of the many reasons people should keep their animals on a leash. So, my friend, with a roomie, lived in a duplex next to this uptight couple who had a son 4 or 5ish. The duplex was owned by my college, and their house is literally surrounded by college-owned buildings. Every time my friend walked to class, she made the mistake of waving to the kid once. The mother glared and yelled for her not to look at her kid. My friend is a complete girl next door Mary Jane type. This is when the trouble began. Basically, this uptight couple would just look for excuses to call the police on us. The first few times they called and complained that we were lighting up weed. The house was searched. College owned. No drugs found. Later for excessive giggling. Apparently, we were giggling so much obviously we are on drugs. This is when the local cops and campus police were beginning to get annoyed. So, the neighbors complained about noise, specifically laughter. I stood outside your window, wasn't too loud, but hey, just try and keep it down, so they stopped calling us. Another few drug calls, At this point, police stopped searching. They would just come to the door and ask, "Are you high?" My friend and I, number. They would then leave. Revenge. So, we ended up having a last minute party of 10 people. Honestly, most of the group other than my friend and another was underage. We were drinking, drunk apples to apples and other drinking games. Again, knock knock, it was the police. My friend and I tell everyone to hide the kitchen. So everyone piles in. We answer the door. "Hi officers, is there a problem?" Both of our cheeks are obviously flushed, probably slurred mildly. "Officer, any underage drinkers?" Us. "No, officer." Neighbors complaining again. "You guys aren't really that loud. As long as you all keep this volume we won't bother you again tonight." We continued partying through the night uninterrupted. TLDR. Neighbors looks for excuses to get my friends and I arrested. Call police so much. The one time we are doing something illegal the police don't take it seriously. One sunny afternoon, a friend of mine came to pick me up from my house, where I'd lived for 12 plus years. We were about to start driving, when I remembered that I'd forgotten my phone or something and had to run back inside. While I was inside, which was all of 3 minutes, my neighbor across the street, a middle-aged divorced lady, walked over to my friend sitting in her car and said, "I just saw that girl go inside. Are you friends with her?" My friend said, "Yes." The lady replied, "Okay, well, just so you know, there's a neighborhood watch on this street, so don't try anything because I'm watching you." Then she went back into her house. I came back outside and jumped in the car, oblivious. My friend, who was a tiny Asian girl, told me what happened, and all I could think was, WTF. When I was in high school I was about 5 feet tall. I wasn't very tall at all. I was waiting for my first class to start and these two kids came up to me and tried to rob me. I ended up fighting with them for like 15 minutes, putting up the best fight I could, but being smaller and outnumbered it was mostly just defensive and the occasional shot in. Pretty sure I did break one butthole's nose. Then a few kids walk by casually like nothing is wrong. At this point I'm in a corner just getting hit. I'm not even paying attention to the kids hitting me anymore. I'm just so speechless that they're not even stopping. My eyes just locked onto theirs and followed them as they walked by, watching what was going on but not doing a dang thing. You were only 5 feet tall. You were not very tall at all. And so those meanies in the hall, they pushed you up against a wall, which is no fun when you are small. My town is well known for having a ton of construction companies and every company has an oversized pickup truck that is far too large for our small congested streets. One day a construction truck ran me off the road, bending my rim and popping a tire. My car just happened to stop in front of an empty driveway. Just as I start to change wheels, some old couple pulls up and starts yelling at me for blocking their driveway. I tried to explain that I had no choice and it would only take a minute, but they could care less. Apparently parking on the street and walking an extra 10 feet was too inconvenient for them. The conversation ended with them ranting about how America was going to heck and how people like me have no respect. Sometimes it's better to ignore oddballs like these. Trying to bring rationality to some people is just a waste of time. The conversation ended with them ranting about how America was going to heck and how people like me have no respect. To be fair, they weren't exactly wrong, but I doubt they considered themselves a part of that equation. Everything Westboro Baptist Church. Just this Thanksgiving, my wife was in a Walmart before freaking Black Friday and bought the last 2 pumpkin pies available. She put them in her cart. A lady approaches and says, "Where did you get those?" My wife says, "Back there, but I think I got the last 2. The lady then proceeds to reach into our cart and remove one of the pies. My wife's hand shoots out to grab the lady's hand and says, "Don't." Lady says, "But I need a pie for Thanksgiving." My wife says, "I'm done," and then puts on her best WTF face. Not that extreme, but definitely made me wonder. Last week at Starbucks, a man politely asked a seated woman if he could use the outlet that happened to be near her. She said, "I'm not moving for anybody." He hadn't asked her to move, but she proceeded to rant about how she couldn't believe people used their computers at Starbucks and she was sick of people harassing her. Easy. My mother, her sister, and get nephew all took a walk through our local chili cook-off, which is just a large, outdoor block party with legal drinking, food and fun. I'm on a short trip to Las Vegas at this point, not around to help out. My mother's nephew while pushing my mother in the crosswalk due to her physical handicap, accidentally caused my mother to fall out of her wheelchair forwards with a chair falling on her from behind. The front wheels got caught on that little lip of the curb that is still evident as you cross onto the new sidewalk from street level. As a result, the nephew literally just ran home, no doubt due to the embarrassment of my mom's yelling, due to pain. So with the help of 2 passers-by, my mother and her sister got into the car and back to the house. But now here's the WTF. As my mom was being helped out of the car and back into a wheelchair, she fell out onto the driveway, no doubt further damaging her leg, and instead of helping her sister up and into the chair, the aunt exclaimed that she had no time to waste helping her up, to stop being such a baby and to get herself into the house. My mother's sister then left, supposedly to go find her son who had ran away from the chili cook-off. Turns out my mom had a completely broken femur, in half, and just above the right knee. So in this condition my mom was forced to drag her overweight body up the driveway, up 3 large stairs, through the doorway, and literally from one end of the house to the other. Oh, and all the time it took caused my mother to wet herself before she could get inside. Thinking about this incident again makes me cringe and sad. Some people don't deserve to be called family. My first car accident was in a Walmart, more proof that Walmart is evil, parking lot. It was a rainy day, and the parking lot was mostly empty. The entrances exits were in the back of the lot, and I had just pulled in and was driving down the lane regardless of the empty spots cause I wanted to get as close as I could to the store, and some dumbie is cutting across the back of the lot as fast as possible. People cut across the back of the parking lots all the time. I know, I don't care. But I slam on my brakes hoping she finds a way around me since she had the time to do so. Instead, she plows right into my front bumper. I had an old truck at the time, and it was like hitting a tank for her. But the first thing she does is get out and screams at me, "What did you do to my car?" Not even trying to do the avoid responsibility for insurance purposes thing. She was angry and thought it was my fault. I laughed at her. She did not care for it. She also didn't care for me taking pictures that eventually made her insurance claim laughable. I'm in the driving lane with the arrow that's painted to show you which way to go is behind me. Your car is over 4 parking spots diagonally and connected to my bumper. Pay up, B. I used to work in banquet service, setting up, not serving food, for a large hotel chain. I worked a late shift so I was the only one from my department on staff. I was never very busy. I was mostly there in case someone needed an extra table or chair, etc. So I carried a walkie-talkie in case I was needed somewhere. One day I get paged over the walkie-talkie, "Crackle-eyed peon. Can you swing by the front desk when you get a chance?" Crackle. I had already finished all of my tasks for the day so I was watching Law and Order in the break room. So on a commercial break I saunter up to the front desk and ask, "Hey, what's up?" The front desk clerk says, "Oh hey, the banquet table is on fire." I reply, "What clerk? Yay, look." So I walk around the corner and sure enough, the buffet table we had set up outside a conference room is on fire. One of the alcohol burners used for keeping dishes warm had tipped over. I grab a nearby tablecloth and smother the fire. I walk back by the front desk and impart this wisdom: next time something is on fire, try to convey a sense of urgency. He just stood there and blinked at me. Also, he had a fire extinguisher behind the front desk. TLDR. Loch Ness Monster starts hotel fire to collect tree fiddy. My pony, who we boarded at a self-care facility, started colicking the day before my senior year was supposed to start. With horses, colic can mean a lot of things, and a crap ton of things can set it off. Basically, it's a general term for a horse's stomach ache, which for them can easily be lethal, as this situation ended up being, often simply because they have no vomiting mechanism. Now, my pony was obviously having a hard time of it. He was covered in sweat, pain absolutely emanating from him, and it was taking 4 people literally dragging this 800-pound animal to keep him from dropping to the ground and rolling. Rolling can complicate the colic, even causing knots to form in the intestines. So it is advised that you continuously walk a horse that is trying to roll during colic. This was obviously an intensely serious and dangerous medical situation. Even the most ignorant person would have been able to identify that immediately. One of the boarders was a very snobby and self-important woman who, much to everybody's disgust, had a habit of driving down the barn's long hallway and parking her goddamn trashy Volvo outside of her stalls, making foot traffic awkward and horse traffic almost impossible in a horse barn. So we're desperately dragging this dying horse up and down the length of the barn's hall, waiting for the vet to come and drug him up. And this woman drives up, opens the hall gate, and starts driving in. Another boarder ran to inform her of the situation so she'd stay the frick out of the way with her goddamned Volvo, but she just turned her nose up and kept driving, locking us into the far third of the hall. Frick your dying horse, apparently. For those who are curious, he ended up being taken to the vet's facility and put on an IV drip and absurd amounts of painkillers, before it was determined he didn't have a chance. A twist in his intestine, we think, from just rolling the wrong way out in the pasture, cut off blood supply and killed 6 feet of gut. We were extremely attached to this awesome guy. R.I.P. Coco Pony. Sorry about your sweet pony, and totally screw that horribly lady. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.